Hello, and welcome to the Rough Edges podcast with Sarah I. Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create an empowering resource for those who wish to discover more about these topics. I pray that this podcast will not only bless you, but that it will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. Today, I am very excited to introduce my guest, Mr. Brandon Russ. Brandon Russ is an artist and content creator. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 2017, he spent the last few years using social media to spread awareness about mental illness. More recently, he has become more interested in the intersections of being Black, social injustice, mental illness, and spirituality. Welcome, Brandon.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to be having this conversation. I appreciate you making time to speak to me.
Yes, absolutely. And Brandon, I just want to say that I am really touched by your work, and that's actually how we connected on Instagram. And
Yeah,
I love the work that you do, especially in not only mental health advocacy, but also bringing that awareness to the Black community. So I'm really excited to have you on.
thank you. I appreciate it. I'm definitely excited. I feel like probably started following each other like maybe like a couple years or you lose
Yeah.
track of stuff like that. But I mean, it's been cool to on your end as well, just to see like the podcast and I'm super excited for the talk. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And so before we dive into our topic for today, what are three things that keep you motivated on a daily basis and why?
I think right now in life, faith is a huge thing that keeps me motivated, like in a on a day-to-day basis. Really, just because we encounter so many things on a day-to-day basis, so many good things, but also like challenging things. And I feel like, as you can probably relate to this as well, but like faith just kind of given a framework to make sense of those challenges sometimes. So I would say like that's one thing. Really making it a point to serve others through my job and just helping other people in need. So I guess kind of trying to get outside of myself helps as well. And then I would say art or just creativity. So in all forms, I used to just see myself more as a music artist, but now it's like any chance I get to be able to create literally anything like cooking, videos, literally anything creative, that's something I usually look forward to on a day-to-day basis and something that keeps me motivated as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I resonate with all of those, especially with faith and how it does help keep us grounded, especially when things and life is going haywire. I really resonate with that.
Yeah, because life is confusing a lot of the times, and I
Mhm.
understand how myself included, people can reach a place of hopelessness or even despair because there's so much going on in the world and internally, externally, both of them. But it's like, just having something to kind of be like, okay, I'm understanding this a little bit more. This stuff isn't just happening for nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that mental health is a huge part of your journey. Do you
Mhm.
mind sharing a little bit about that, like how you got your diagnosis and how you were able to seek help and everything?
Yeah, so I think my earliest memories of like mental health was really more kind of growing up. I'm thinking maybe later elementary school, going through phases of just feeling just sad, but I would even describe it as empty sometimes. In response to family issues and things like that. By the time I got to middle school and just that environment kind of opened up a world of like, okay, like how do I respond to these things? And so, of course, peers and it just was normalized in school. Like you respond to these things by using substances, you respond to these things by, all of these other things that aren't necessarily healthy, maybe a bit maladaptive, but it's like that's what I knew at the time. And so that carries over into high school. Back to the substances. I had a really bad trip one time when I was younger. The result of that, I'm convinced may have brought about a lot of mental health symptoms even after that time. I had a lot of flashbacks, of constant anxiety and things like that. And then by the time I got ready to go to college, went on a band scholarship, was excited to go to band camp and stuff like that, but I had a panic attack. That really altered everything for me as an early adult. Dropped band, was able to get through college, but fast forward up until recently, kind of mid 20s, was experiencing more depression, anxiety. That's what I was diagnosed with in college up until that point. But then I started noticing little things where it's like, okay, like I'm up super early for no reason in the morning. I'm like cleaning my apartment. Those things felt normal at first, but then it was more like, this is kind of peculiar. It wasn't necessarily harmful, but it was just the more I started talking about some of those things.
Hello again. Before you dive into the rest of today's episode, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your support and for hitting that play button. If you want to expand on that support, here are 3 ways you can do so. 1. Leave a review. If anything in today's episode resonated with you, or you would want to share about how the podcast changed your life, you can do so by leaving a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. 2. Check out our shop. The Rough Edges shop is a faith based, women of color owned online shop where you can get a variety of products from tote bags, journals, t shirts, and more. 20% of the proceeds go to a mental health organization. So check it out at roughedgespodcast.com/shop. 3. Connect on social media. Rough Edges is on a wide variety of social media platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and more. If you want to connect outside of listening to the podcast episodes, you can do so on these platforms. If you have any questions, you can check out the episode description or stay to the end for more information. Now, enjoy your episode.
The nurse practitioner I saw at the time was like, I think you have bipolar too. And that really rocked my world because I didn't know a lot about bipolar at the time. And because of the stigma behind it, I kind of saw it as more, oh, this is like a real, like severe, mental illness. And, since then, it's just been more of a trial and error, trying to make life adjustments and just be mindful of different things. A lot of ups and downs, still struggle a lot to this day, but I think it's just like a learning experience and trying my best to keep healing and talking about it and having conversations like this and hopefully be, a benefit to others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I also love that you had that support to help you recognize that it might be something a little more serious than just doing an early morning clean of my
Yeah,
apartment. So
yeah.
that's also important. We're talking about men's mental health. So, in light of that, what would you say are your thoughts on the stigma surrounding men expressing their emotions and seeking help for their mental health?
I think that it's unfortunate because I think a lot of men don't really get the help that we need. We stigmatize ourselves, but it comes from social norms of what it means to be a man or what manhood actually is. And it shows up in different ways in different communities, but there's very much a thing of like, if you're a man, you gotta just hold it together. You gotta be tough all the time. This macho bravado is to show strength at all times, like that type of thing. I feel like it is changing gradually over the last 10 years. Conversations like this have come up a lot more. But generally speaking, I think it can be harmful. Gotta stay tough, gotta be this whole conversation now of like being an alpha male
Yeah,
or whatever, like all this other toxic masculinity. I know that's a term that's come up a lot recently, but it's a real thing. A lot of times, men, we may know we need help. Like deep down inside, it's like, I know something isn't right or something's off, but that vulnerability of asking for help would show people I'm not a man. And that's such a flawed way of thinking, but it's not our fault. I just think it's more of a social issue in a way.
yeah. I
Yeah.
definitely agree with that, especially with expectations placed
Hmm.
upon men to be the providers, to be the alpha male. That's on the rise now. A lot of these are societal norms that are impressed
Hmm.
upon men, which
Hmm.
can really not only stifle them from actually expressing the needs that they have, especially psychologically, but
Hmm.
it also keeps them in a box where it's like, oh, I can't express those things, otherwise
Yeah.
I'll be seen as less than.
Right. And the thing about it, I don't think there's anything wrong if you do hold the belief that men are providers, but what does that look like? You can be a provider and not be emotionally cut off or right. It's all about a balance. And I just think hopefully, God willing in time or over time, just having more talks like this and seeing other men like publicly having these conversations and seeing like especially this next generation or children or whoever, like just seeing them being like, oh, this is okay to
Yeah.
talk about. I don't feel he's less of a man just because he's talking about it. And hopefully sooner than later, as conversations continue to be had and things like this.
I definitely agree with that. Another aspect is men expressing their emotions is often seen as less masculine or less manly. So, in your own mental health journey, how have you learned to openly express your emotions despite it being stigmatized?
I think one thing for context, I've always been emotional since I can remember. I just felt things very deeply, but it's like even certain family, like males, kind of like scolded for it in a way, but I think I just got to a point growing up testing the waters, blessed to have certain spaces where the response wasn't negative. My social media journey at first was really primarily as an artist, but then kind of shortly after the bipolar diagnosis, I would do mainly music and then maybe every once in a while touch on some of the stuff we're talking about. And I think once I saw the impact of that versus the music, I was like, wait a minute, like people actually are okay with this. And then it was kind of like I would just kind of come back and keep testing the waters until eventually it was just more like, okay, this is actually a good conversation to have and a good quality to have. Also starting to see the damage of the opposite of that, of like the hyper masculinity and toxic masculinity, and really just starting to understand how that's damaged a lot of families and so many different, ways it's been damaging. But I think the more I've understood that, the more I've been like, okay, I just want to challenge myself to do it. It's still hard, and sometimes it makes me feel, am I too emotional or whatever? But I think being around other people that understand that it's okay, that's helped as well. Even in the moments where I feel like I'm tripping, it's like, no, bro, you're good. It's okay. You're still a man. You know what I mean? Like it's that type of thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I love what you said about that aspect of vulnerability and
Mhm.
having other people see you taking a public stance on these things. Because I'm not gonna lie, when I saw your reels and the things you were doing in terms of raising awareness about mental health education, that's
Mhm.
one of the things that drew me to your platform. Not only was I seeing like, wow, a guy is talking
Mhm.
about this finally, because I've
Mhm.
only ever seen women expressing those things, and that's great too. But to see a guy stepping up, and not only a man, but a person of color, a black man,
Mhm.
also having these conversations, I was like, yes, finally, let's
Yeah.
see this more often, you know?
Yeah, and the way that really even started was one time shortly after I was hospitalized, more like, the like depressed side of things. And I think I was hospitalized for like a week. And I remember coming home after that and starting to take the deep dive into YouTube and other people talking about just some of the things that we struggle with bipolar. And I just noticed it was like a void with men, but even more specifically, like I felt like it was a void with male. I would see some coverage on the provider side, but I didn't see a lot of people that were on our side, if that makes sense. And then to take that a step further, I didn't see a lot of black men at all. I just feel like there's a space for more of these conversations to be had. I just really would just want to do my part. And I just like it. Like I've kind of fell in love with making content too, so that helps too, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Continue because it helps to spark the conversation and bring it more to the forefront. I find it interesting that you mentioned it was more providers talking about mental health, which is something I also found it would
Yeah.
be psychologists and therapists
Mhm.
doing videos and podcasts talking
Yeah.
about the science behind it, but there weren't a lot of people that had the,
Yeah.
condition talking about that too.
Right. Right. I think the term probably I was looking for is peer.
And I hope that we continue to break those barriers and more of us start advocating and having these hard conversations for sure.
We need it. It's so many people just going through it. I see it a lot with my job. I work in the mental health field. It's heartbreaking to see people hopeless. Sometimes people don't even realize sometimes what help is even available. And then if they do realize it, it's still this like, I don't know, because if I open up and say I need it, then people are gonna look at, that type of thing. But anyway.
Honestly, that's a valid concern, especially with the stigma and all of these other factors that keep people from speaking. And in
Mhm.
light of that, I do want to share some statistics with you
Yeah.
in light of men's mental health. And it comes from Self-Space, which is a mental health website. It says that 40% of men have never spoken to anyone about their mental health. 29% of those men say that they're too embarrassed to speak about it, while another 20% say that there's a negative stigma. What are your thoughts on these statistics, and have any of them ever rang true for you?
I think this is a challenge, and with men is one thing, but to like really see the numbers, it's like, whoa, it's a lot of people considering that sometimes studies don't fully represent everyone. It really could be more than that. It's shocking, but not surprising. It solidifies the need to address it more. Personally, I've definitely been in these numbers at some point. It fluctuates. Like sometimes I'm like, I do want help. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know. So it just depends on where I am in life and what's going on. But yeah, I can relate to those for sure.
Most definitely. And you make a great point about this being just a snapshot of the actual data. Because I've also gotten that in past episodes when I brought up these statistics. It's like, huh, that seems like a smaller number than it might actually be. And there
Mhm.
are a lot of variables that go into that. But you
Oh
make
yeah.
a great point about a lot more people deal with this than we realize.
When you really do the math on how many people are in a city or state or world, even, it's like, yo, it's a lot of people out here that are foregoing getting help. But we just keep doing what we can, and hopefully things will shape up a little bit better.
You kind of touched on this earlier, but what was your experience in seeking support for your mental health? When was the moment where you were like, okay, I'm actually going to start seeking support? And how did you overcome the difficulties associated with that?
I think it was really when after that panic attack, right before band camp, up until then, having a bad trip on some substances when I was earlier in high school. For the rest of high school, I suffered a lot mentally, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want anyone, first of all, I didn't want my mom to know like I've been using substances because that would be a whole nother issue. But so I hid it a lot. But I think like because my it was a huge dream of mine to go to band camp and play in college band. When I saw like this is something going on internally that is literally making it to where like I can't even perform as a musician, which is something I've been doing for years up until that point. I was like, yeah, something's not right at all. And I think it was more of a necessity at the time too, because I was scared. I was in so much fear because coming out of high school, I didn't have the language that we have now to describe stuff like this. And, at that time, pre-Instagram, YouTube was around at that time, but it's just my understanding of mental health, it still was sort of a foreign thing. I just knew I feel weird. I feel like I'm tripping. So I was like, man, I have to go get some help. And I asked my mom, and she came to where I was going to school and we went to a doctor. That's how the help started. It was more like necessity at the time, you know.
hmm Yeah, and honestly, I resonate with that as well because my journey also started out of necessity. I wasn't really taking it as seriously as I should have. A lot of times we do it out of necessity and
Mhm.
not preventative measures, especially growing up in the Black community, which is another question I had for you. What was your experience like growing up in the Black community regarding mental health? Because I know that's also heavily stigmatized. Did that affect you in going to seek help at all? And how did you overcome that aspect as well?
It's interesting because that stigma shifts a lot in our community. I'll give an example or two ends of it. One side that I would see was very much on the crying end or sadness, and I saw that being punished a lot in school and growing up where I grew up. You had to have this hard exterior. I never had that, but it's like seeing peers in school being like harmed or either made fun of because they were black, male, and emotional. It was like, maybe I do need to suppress this. But then the other side of it is in certain neighborhoods, like in certain areas where you may have people experiencing homelessness, may be hallucinating, like different things like that, substances. There's some communities where they just become known as like, oh, that's like auntie or that's whoever it is. And people don't really talk about what's actually wrong with auntie or what's going on with her mentally. It's just like, oh, she just throwed off or like this language that our community will use. So sometimes it's not getting the help because we're not really calling it what it actually is. Like she has a mental health condition. And so I feel like on a lot of different ends, it was just more, and I don't think it's necessarily our fault either as a community because my grandparents didn't have the language or education to talk about. I'll give a perfect example. My grandma, what I now know as anxiety, would describe like one of my uncles as having like nervous stomach, which is like a somatic way to describe anxiety.
Yeah.
Culturally, different cultures describe things through somatics as well. I don't think it's our fault. I just think it's like just in our experience here, like I don't think we were really afforded to understand it. And I feel like newer generations, our generation and beyond, the dialogue is opening up a lot more. I know I'm kind of going all over, but those are just some of my experiences and it being interesting the way it's viewed in different settings and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I definitely see that with my own family because sometimes we, like you said, we don't call a spade a spade. Like we don't say, "Oh, this might be a serious mental issue." We just say, "Oh, that's just how she is," or, she'll get over it. It'll be fine.
Right.
And so we don't really talk about what are the things that are going on with us. I also think that another aspect of that is the systemic racism that has played a role in us being able to even seek help. Because a lot of the times it's seen as, oh, that's what, these people do. This is afforded for rich people. There are a lot of different things that come into play when it comes to our people trying to seek help for mental health?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think once I really understood that kind of drawing the line between specifically like our experience with slavery here and understanding that there was a time where us expressing emotion could literally be a life or death thing. And so it's like all these different movies that kind of cover what life was like on the plantation, or even narratives and journals and stuff like that, where you hear about parents harshly disciplining their children if they felt like they were expressing something or showing something that would end up being punished or that would affect production on the plantation and things like that. And so then that made me think like, okay, so that makes sense why my granddad's dad and my granddad and my dad, and it's just like big light bulb moment. It's starting to show a lot more compassion to our people and kind of take this blame off of us as far as why we are like why we handle things like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. And especially because, like you were mentioning before, like the older generations, they didn't have the tools and they
Mm,
also didn't have the language to be able to
mm,
describe what's happening to them. Their methods, it was either, okay, let's go to church, let's pray about it,
yeah.
or let's have some tea or something to take the edge off. We really didn't have the tools and the language back then. So even with our parents and our grandparents, they were in survival mode for a lot of the time. So they didn't really have time to contemplate about what's going on the inside and their emotional state because they were busy trying to survive.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's the interesting thing about using coping strategies. They serve you at a certain point, but sometimes it solidifies a habit until you're way down the line somewhere else in history where it's like we're still operating off of this, but it doesn't serve us anymore. The context is different now, but we're still operating off of this.
Honestly, that is so true. A lot of the coping mechanisms that we've had for so
Yeah.
long, it's important to find a balance between mental health education and
Mm,
actual treatment strategy.
mm.
Because a
Yeah.
lot of the times we lean harder into one over the other, and we don't
Mhm.
realize that we need both of them to cope and thrive with these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So I also wanted to ask, do you ever feel that you're not man enough if you struggle with mental health issues? And if so, how do you manage that feeling?
I think it really depends on the context or the relationship, if that makes sense. For example, I've had this happen where my mental health, particularly on the depressed side, is like not being able to show up the way I need to at work, sometimes doesn't make me feel less of a man, but I've been in a relationship before where not going to work may result in certain income issues and that go against my belief as far as just being able to provide and things like that as a man. Initially, it may not be like that in itself, but the way it has that ripple effect on other things. Sometimes it has been like that, not necessarily for expressing it, but more the consequences of how it's expressing. But I think I'm finally getting to a point where it's like, I'm becoming more okay with it because I'm starting to also realize, yeah, like people tend to like more gentle or nice, kind people than you being aggressive all the time. And so I still teeter, but it's starting to be more of just really embracing it, you know?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that the stigma is changing a little bit. People are now embracing authenticity and embracing compassion. So it's more like, okay, we want people to be vulnerable, but at the same time, it's like be vulnerable to a certain extent that it doesn't make me uncomfortable. So if you could change at least two stigmas about how society or the Black community views men's mental health, what would you change and why?
I think one stigma that I would change is that I think it comes across as like a compliment to society, but like the image that men are always strong because what that does is it really creates the problem we just spent time talking about. Once you divert away from that image, now you're seen as something other than a man because you're kind of drawn outside the lines now. And so I think that's one stigma just about manhood in general. But I think specifically like mental health, I would say probably that is a mark against us. If we seek help, then when other people see us seeking help, they can't rely on us anymore. Like we somehow become like a, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's more like, okay, now people around us see us seeking help, like our family or job, this kind of narrative, like, oh, you better not do that because if they see that, then they're going to know something's wrong. I think that one kind of trickle down effect covers a lot of other things. So I would say if I had to say, I probably could give a better answer, like thinking about it a lot more. That's a great question, though.
You're good. That speaks to the problem of people having preconceived notions about what a man should be. And even when you said, oh, when people see you seeking help, it's like, oh, they're not really reliable anymore, or they're not as strong as I thought they were. They're just like, oh, you have problems. I can't depend on you. And I
Yeah.
think that's really unfortunate, especially when we think about what actually makes a man. Yes, provision is like a part of that, but it's not the overall theme of what it actually means to be masculine. Yeah.
Yeah, the other side, like the more I think about it, even hearing you say that, is it creates a lot of performative men where it's always this need to like perform at a high level. It's running rampant now with all of these vloggers where it's like you need to be waking up at 3:30 in the morning, you need to
Yeah.
take the cold bath, and you need to bruh, like I'm not training to be that all the time or do that at all, to be frank. It creates this pressure to perform at a high level all the time. Some days we just can't because we're not robots or machines. We have a flesh and blood body that will shut us down even when we try to go above that. The pressure that puts on a lot of men just leads to a lot of men carrying this stress leads to so many physical issues too. It's such a web.
That's a good point, especially about the cycle we find ourselves in when we perform at a high level. Eventually, if you don't rest, if you don't take a break, if you don't prioritize your body, like you said, is going to find that rest for you. It's going to shut down. And so you end up getting back to where you needed to be anyway in terms of resting. So,
Yeah.
so in terms of your mental health advocacy, you do a lot of work to help raise awareness in these areas. How do you foster a community through your advocacy in which men feel more comfortable about opening up about their mental health?
I think just trying my best to like model it in a way that it's okay. Because I honestly don't have all the answers, and I'm really shooting in the dark a lot of the times. But it's like I think just being committed to just putting it out there and showing it's okay, and even having one-on-one conversations with people and making it a point to always make space to talk about stuff like this. I've never been with anyone I've met through social media or in person where I try to make it a point to give people space to express emotion, whether it be men or women, but it's just trying to model that and not do anything that would make people feel uncomfortable. And I know I've messed up a lot and have said things that may make people feel like that, but my intention is just to make people feel safe and hopefully men feel safe in that as well, but just people in general. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Brandon, I want to thank you so much for joining me. But
Yes,
before
thank
we
you.
go, I have one final question for you. What advice or words of encouragement do you have for men who struggle to manage or seek help for their mental health?
I think the first piece of advice is just to start questioning why you feel it's inappropriate to do that. Is that an innate concern, or do you feel like that's something that's been given to you, a narrative that's been given to you, and question it because it's a lie to say you're not a man to seek help. I would also say just find an appropriate help too. And by appropriate, I mean like that feels good to you, that is fitting to you, because sometimes you may seek help and it may not be like what you need. And that may turn into, oh, well, I sought help and that's not, I must not supposed to be seeking help because clearly it's not helping. So find something that works for you. Community is another thing. Being around not just other men seeking help, but people in general. It's a shared courage, and you may be able to walk away from that. Like, you know what? I'm a man. I'm gonna go seek me some help because I've been talking to other people that aren't afraid to do those things. Not everyone has to be an advocate either. You could just seek help and that be the thing. If you are interested in speaking up, the greater reward is knowing you're tapping into a larger issue outside of yourself and being courageous or attempting to be. And that takes time too, but just attempting to put yourself out there. And if it's just for you, cool. If not, that's cool too. But it's all good. At the end of the day, our identities aren't expressed by these things a lot of times that our world or society is telling us. It's okay. You're still a man. Masculinity is still there.
Thank you so much, Brandon, once again for joining me.
I appreciate being here. This was a great conversation. I'm walking away with a lot of afterthoughts and things to consider and think about. So I appreciate you as well.
And if people wanted to connect with you and learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yes, on social media, Instagram and TikTok. I'm on Instagram like way more, but on both platforms it's at the real B Russ. So the real and then BRUSS.
Awesome. Thanks again, and everyone stay tuned for more empowering episodes on Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rough Edges podcast with Sarah I. Fox. If you want more updates on the podcast, you can follow on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast, or you can visit the official podcast website at roughedgespodcast.com. Thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.